It was a cool fall day in 1981. There was a mist in the air, and the ground was wet with brown and orange leaves scattered about as I walked up the steps to my junior high school in Western Mass. Now, this serene and picturesque view of New England was the darkest period of my life. You see, I'm what we call first-generation city. I grew up in an urban neighborhood, but my mom and family grew up in the backwoods of Massachusetts, away from everybody. The Nipmuc homelands was a vast area comprising almost 2/3 of Massachusetts, or roughly 4,000 square miles. The entire homelands includes parts of New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. My family were fishermen, farmers, crafters, and laborers who used the land and their hard work to provide for them. Their learning took place on the land and the oral stories that were passed down to them. The word school itself had become a pejorative to them. In the late 1800s, the American trope was, kill the Indian to save the man. And during the boarding school era, the school's goal was to systematically erase culture, identity, and spirituality of indigenous people and replace that with European values. That's why 100 years later, in my junior high school, or high school, there was no mention of Native American people, unless it was relegated to the past or a sports team mascot. I never heard of a Native person accomplish anything or doing anything positive in my class. And many teachers had told me that Native people were extinct. I felt like a hapless bystander who only stood to benefit from white proximity. My happiest times were when I was with my grandfather in the country. He was a quiet and reserved man who lived his life in the cabin deep in the woods. He had lived close to nature more than anybody I have ever known, and he was connected to all life around him. And this backyard was no backyard at all, but actually miles of forest that actually connected up with another farm and pasture when you finally caught up to it. My brothers and I, we used to love to walk those trails and find new paths and pick berries along the way. That was the happiest time I was as a child. Back at school in the city, the more I would try to fit in, the more differently I would be treated. And there would always be that question, even from the teachers, what are you? And I'd be afraid to say because the jokes would always follow. Well, can you make it rain? Can you walk on fire? Whether it was being bullied or physically attacked, I never knew it was going to come next. It was a deeply painful time in my life. And as a result, I found a way to cope with that, or at least I thought I did, and that was through alcohol. And by the age of 16, I was drinking quite frequently. Depression and alcohol was a way of life. And things started going bad at home, so I was spending a lot of time in the streets. And I was able to work just enough to keep my alcohol supply coming. And right after high school, I joined the military and did a lot more drinking. By the age 22, I was in a rehab facility. Now, as a kid, I had watched many of my own relatives die at a young age, younger than I was, from alcohol. And I seemed to be heading in the same way. Then there was that one day that changed my life. I was in that stale cot there in the rehab, and the TV was on, and I looked over, and of all things, it was a PBS documentary. And they were talking about Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the New World. And that piqued my interest, and I listened in earnest. And the narrator went on to talk about how alcohol was brought to the New World, and it was weaponized against the indigenous population to destroy their culture and steal their land. And as he spoke, time seemed to stand still. I had emotions rising up inside me that I could not fully articulate. I wanted to scream, laugh, cry, all at the same time. There was this reverberation crying out for justice from my ancient voices that were within me. And when I left that facility, I never drank again after that day. That began my journey of sobriety and my mission to learning about everything I could. And I immediately sought out my grandfather. I had so many questions for him. I wanted to know all about our culture. Who took our land? What are all the things that were left out of the books? And how do we get our land back? And my grandfather told me the stories of his childhood. He told me how they had to hunt and grow their own food and how they shared stories. He told me how his relatives and uncles would carve bows, baskets, and crafts and sell them to whites. because they weren't allowed to work in white spaces. There will be signs that would say, "No dogs or Indians allowed." And I learned that we have over 60 Nipmuc ancestors who fought in the Civil War, fighting for a freedom that they did not have themselves. And after the war, they were promised a pension. But when they died, their spouses never received it. And what's worse, their land was confiscated because they were considered wards of the state. Now, after coming out of this alcoholic fog and learning of such sorrow, it was quite overwhelming. And that's when my grandfather talked to me about the healing medicine of the drum and the power it carries. And we got together with our family. We held awakening ceremonies with the drum. And we did ceremony after ceremony. The one thing I remember that my grandfather told me, he said, "Take this drum. It's going to heal you. It's going to take you many places, and it's going to help you out a lot." And at the time, I did not see it, but my grandfather was so right. Through the drum, and then later my writing, it has taken me around the world to share the story of my people and our journey for close to over 35 years. But the one thing my grandfather told me, he says, "Keep it going." And above that, I'll always remember this one thing that I did with my grandfather, that first time I got the chance to sing to him. We were at my mom's house, and Grandpa had just finished his tea, and he was heading out to the backyard to sit under that cherry tree to smoke his pipe. And I followed behind with drum in hand, and I began to sing, and I saw a smile on his face and a nod of approval. Jessica Niam Kaeyoteyo Payoteyo Aquanenawak Nina one piantam Nina one piantam Hey yo hey yo hey ya Way oh hey oh hey ah way ha hey ha. Thank you.